Welcome to Storytelling and Beyond for yet another great emotional story. Let's enjoy the story. The summer air in Italy was thick with warmth, carrying the scent of fresh bread from a nearby bakery and the distant hum of laughter from the town square. The narrow streets of the small town were lined with charming buildings, their colorful shutters thrown open to invite in the late afternoon breeze. It should have been a dream and adventure in one of the most beautiful places in the world. But as she stood there, the cobblestone street suddenly felt like it was swallowing her whole. She had just been laughing with them. Her husband, his friends, the whole group had been joking around, caught up in the carefree spirit of the trip. They had spent the afternoon exploring, drinking espresso at a tiny cafe, weaving through the town's winding streets. It had been the kind of day she had always imagined traveling through Italy would be. And then, just like that, everything changed. "We'll be right back," her husband had said, smirking as he and the guys piled into the rental car. "Try not to get lost." She had laughed, thinking it was just another one of their playful teases. They were always pulling stunts, pushing the line between humor and cruelty. Sometimes she played along. Sometimes she didn't. But this time, she stood there as the car pulled away. And kept waiting. And waiting. At first, she convinced herself it was part of the joke. Maybe they had gone around the block to mess with her, make her think they had really left. Any minute now, they'd come screeching back, laughing at her panicked face. Any minute now. Her phone buzzed in her hand, and relief flooded through her until she looked down. It wasn't a message from her husband. It wasn't an apology or a gotcha text. It was a notification. No service. The laughter of people walking by suddenly felt too loud, too foreign. She turned in a slow circle, scanning the faces of strangers, hoping one of them might be familiar. But of course, they weren't. She was in a place where no one knew her, where no one spoke her language, where no one had any reason to care that she was standing alone in the middle of the street. A sick feeling crept up her spine. She checked her phone again. Still no service. Her mind started racing. Had they really just left? No, they wouldn't do that. Would they? Of course they would. Her husband and his friends had always treated her like this, like she was just part of the background, something to be dragged along on their wild adventures but never really included. She had spent years convincing herself it was harmless, that it was just their way of joking. But this wasn't harmless. This was abandonment. Her stomach twisted as she replayed the last few minutes in her mind. She had no money on her. No ID. She hadn't even been paying attention to where they had parked the car earlier. And now, as the sun began its slow descent behind the rooftops, the charming little town she had admired all day suddenly felt cold and unfamiliar. Panic clawed at her chest. What if they didn't come back? What if this wasn't a joke? She turned, searching for something, anything, that might help her. But the town was small, and every street looked the same. Winding roads. Stone walls. Balconies overflowing with flowers. It had been beautiful when she was with them. Now, it felt like a labyrinth she would never escape. She swallowed hard, willing herself to stay calm. Think. There had to be a way out of this. Someone had to be able to help. But how could she ask for help when she didn't even know where she was? She took a shaky breath, stepping toward the nearest cafe. A man sat outside, reading a newspaper, a half-empty espresso cup beside him. "Scusy," she tried, her voice wavering. The man looked up. His expression was polite, but his eyes carried no recognition. She forced a smile, trying to ignore the way her hands trembled. "Do you speak English?" He shook his head. Her heart sank. She tried again with another passerby, and then another. Some offered kind smiles but shook their heads. Others barely spared her a glance. No one could understand her. No one could help her. And as the realization settled deep in her bones, as the truth of what had just happened fully sank in, she felt the first sting of tears at the back of her eyes. Her husband and his friends had abandoned her. And she was completely, utterly alone. The last remnants of daylight faded into a dusky glow as she stood frozen in the middle of the cobblestone street, her heart pounding a furious rhythm against her ribs. The town around her was still alive with the evening bustle, shopkeepers pulling in their displays, couples walking hand in hand, the distant clatter of plates and laughter spilling from a small trattoria. To them, it was just another evening. To her, it was the beginning of a nightmare. She wiped at her face, forcing down the rising panic. She couldn't fall apart, not here, not now. She had to think. But what was there to think about? She had no money. No way to call anyone. No idea where she even was. The truth pressed down on her like a weight. They weren't coming back, asterisk. She had ignored the warning signs for too long. Her husband and his friends had always treated her like a punchline to some joke she wasn't in on. Their teasing had never been playful, it had been a game of power, one where she was always the one left looking foolish. And now they had taken the joke too far. The thought of them somewhere else, laughing, maybe already posting about this on their group chat, made her stomach turn. Had they planned this? Had they sat around, coming up with the perfect way to humiliate her? She clenched her fists, a mix of shame and rage boiling beneath her skin. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of breaking down. She turned back toward the cafe she had approached earlier. The man with the newspaper had gone, but a young woman now stood behind the counter, arranging pastries in the display case. Try again. Someone has to help, asterisk. Summoning every ounce of courage, she walked inside. The scent of espresso and warm bread wrapped around her, but the comfort it might have once brought felt distant. The woman behind the counter looked up, offering a polite smile. Buonasera, she greeted. The words were soft, musical, but entirely foreign. Her throat tightened. How do I say this? She swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. Hi, English? The woman's brow furrowed slightly, her smile faltering. Ah, unpa, she answered, hesitantly lifting her hand to gesture asterisk a little, asterisk. It was something. She struggled for the right words. I need help. My husband, he left. No phone. No money. She pointed at her empty hands, miming the absence of everything she needed. The woman's face softened with understanding, but a shadow of concern flickered behind her eyes. Ah, lost? She nodded, the lump in her throat growing heavier. Yes. Lost. The woman bit her lip, glancing toward the back of the cafe, as if debating what to do. For a second, hope sparked in her chest. Maybe she had found someone willing to help. Maybe. A voice interrupted. Lena. Vienika. An older man emerged from the back, his expression sharp with curiosity. The woman, Lena, immediately straightened, stepping toward him. She spoke quickly, gesturing toward her. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. Hesitation. Uncertainty. The man's eyes flicked to her, assessing, before turning back to Lena. His response was curt, final. She didn't need to speak Italian to know what he was saying. Not our problem, asterisk. Lena's face fell slightly, but she nodded. When she turned back to her, the warmth in her expression had dimmed. Sorry, she said softly, her voice almost apologetic. No help. The hope that had been flickering inside her was snuffed out in an instant. Her stomach dropped. She gave a stiff nod, stepping back toward the door, feeling the sting of humiliation burn in her cheeks. The moment she stepped outside, the night felt even colder. She had never felt more alone in her life. The night deepened, the warmth of the day completely swallowed by the cool Italian air. She wrapped her arms around herself as she wandered aimlessly through the town, her footsteps echoing against the empty cobblestone streets. The laughter and chatter from restaurants and cafes had begun to fade, replaced by the quiet hum of a town settling in for the night. She had hoped, prayed, that someone would offer help. That someone would notice the desperation in her eyes and step in. But no one had. She had tried 3 more shops, each time forcing back tears as she repeated her broken plea, lost. No phone. No money. Please help, Each time, she had been met with the same hesitant expressions. The same nervous glances. The same curt apologies. It wasn't that they were cruel. They were cautious. A woman alone, speaking a foreign language, looking disheveled and frantic, maybe they thought she was a scammer, or maybe they were just too wrapped up in their own lives to care. Either way, she was still alone. A wave of exhaustion crashed over her. Her feet ached from walking, her head throbbed from the whirlwind of emotions, and the weight in her chest grew heavier with every passing minute. She stopped in the middle of the square, staring up at the darkened windows of the buildings around her. The streets had emptied now, leaving only a few stragglers, some young men laughing as they walked toward a side alley, a couple leaning against a fountain, whispering to each other. A deep, paralyzing fear curled around her ribs. Where was she supposed to go? The reality of her situation hit her with full force. She had nowhere to sleep. She had no one to call. She had nothing. A shiver ran down her spine, not from the cold, but from the sheer hopelessness of it all. And then, as if the universe wanted to twist the knife even deeper, her stomach let out a loud, aching growl. She pressed a hand against it, swallowing hard. How long had it been since she'd eaten? She couldn't even remember. Her last meal had been a quick pastry at a cafe that morning, back when she still thought she was on a romantic getaway. Before her husband and his friends had decided to turn her life into a cruel joke. Her lip trembled. She would not cry. She would not give them the satisfaction. But the lump in her throat made it hard to breathe, the weight of everything pressing down on her like an invisible hand squeezing the air from her lungs. She sank down onto a stone bench, wrapping her arms around herself. The thought crept in before she could stop it. Is this how it starts? Was this how people ended up on the streets, forgotten? One bad decision. One moment of misplaced trust. And then, just like that, they slipped through the cracks, left to fend for themselves in a world that kept walking past them without a second glance. Her breath hitched. No. She wouldn't let that happen. She had to figure something out. A plan. A solution. But her mind was too exhausted, too drained to think. She blinked hard, her gaze settling on the dim glow of a street lamp nearby. And that was when she saw him. An old man, hunched slightly, his face lined with the deep creases of age. He sat on a different bench across the square, wrapped in a tattered coat, his hands resting on his knees. His hair was wild, unkempt, and beside him was a small, battered bag. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them looked away. Then, slowly, he lifted a hand and gave her the faintest nod. Not a greeting. Not a dismissal. Just acknowledgement. She realized, with a pang of something she couldn't quite name, that he had been watching her. And worse, he understood exactly why she was here. She hesitated for a long moment, her fingers gripping the fabric of her dress as she sat frozen on the cold stone bench. The old man's gaze remained steady, not probing, not intrusive, just watching. Something about the quiet way he acknowledged her sent a strange shiver down her spine. It wasn't fear. It wasn't pity. It was something else. Recognition. She had spent the last few hours wandering, searching, pleading only to be dismissed like a passing shadow. But now, under the glow of the dim street lamp, she had finally been seen. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she weighed her options. He was a stranger. An unknown. But then again, so was this entire town, this entire night. The streets, the doors that had closed in her face, the people who had turned away, none of them had felt safe. And yet, for some reason, she felt no immediate danger from him. The old man slowly shifted on the bench, patting the empty space beside him. His gesture was almost imperceptible, but it was there, a silent offer. She swallowed hard. 100 warnings ran through her mind. Don't talk to strangers. Don't trust people too easily. Don't let your desperation cloud your judgment. But what choice did she have? Taking a deep, steadying breath, she stood on unsteady legs and took a step forward. Then another. As she reached the bench, she hesitated one last time, scanning his face for any sign of malice. But all she found was patience. Maybe even understanding. Cautiously, she sat down, keeping a safe distance between them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, not awkward, but heavy with unspoken things. Then, in a voice rough with age, the old man spoke. "You are lost." It wasn't a question. She let out a shaky breath, nodding. Yes. His gaze flickered toward the street, where the last few shoplights were beginning to dim. "They left you." Her throat tightened. It sounded so simple when he said it. They thought it would be funny. The words felt bitter on her tongue, laced with exhaustion. The old man didn't react with surprise or disgust. He didn't ask why or how. He simply let out a slow, knowing sigh. "They don't expect you to find your way back." She clenched her jaw, her hands curling into fists in her lap. No. She wasn't supposed to make it through this. They thought she would panic, break down, humiliate herself trying to beg her way back to the hotel. They had left her stranded not because they thought she could handle it, but because they assumed she couldn't. The old man studied her carefully. Then, after a long pause, he reached into the worn fabric of his coat and pulled out something small, something wrapped in brown paper. A piece of bread. He unwrapped it slowly, breaking it in half with calloused fingers. Then, without a word, he held one piece out to her. She stared at it. Her stomach ached at the mere sight of food. She hadn't realized just how hungry she was until now. But more than that, more than the hunger, more than the exhaustion, was the sheer weight of the gesture. After an entire evening of being ignored, dismissed, turned away, someone was offering her something. Something simple. Something human. Her hands trembled as she reached for it, fingers brushing against his rough skin as she took the small piece of bread. She expected him to say something. To ask for something in return. To demand an explanation. But he didn't. Instead, he just nodded toward the food in her hands. Eat? The word carried no command, no force, only quiet insistence. She hesitated for only a moment before taking a bite. The bread was stale but filling, and as she chewed, she felt the sting of tears pressing against her eyes. Not because of the food. Not because of the hunger. But because, for the first time that night, someone had shown her kindness. She had always believed that when a moment of truth arrived, she would be ready. That when she finally stood face to face with betrayal, she would have the perfect words to say. That she would be stronger than the humiliation, stronger than the pain. But now, as she stood in front of her husband and his friends in the grand lobby of their luxury hotel, she felt none of that strength. They had expected her to fail. They had expected her to come crawling back, humiliated, desperate, begging for their help. Instead, she had walked through those doors with her back straight, her head high, and her dignity intact. The entire group sat around a marble coffee table, drinks in hand, their laughter echoing through the space. It was as if nothing had happened, as if leaving her stranded in an unfamiliar town had been nothing more than a brief, amusing side adventure. Her husband was the first to notice her. His smile faltered, confusion flickering across his face before he quickly masked it with indifference. Well, he drawled, leaning back in his chair. Look who made it back. The others turned, some looking amused, some avoiding her gaze altogether. She could still hear their laughter from earlier, the way they had snickered as they drove away, leaving her in that town like she was some forgotten piece of luggage. Like she was nothing. Her fingers tightened at her sides, nails digging into her palms. But she refused to let them see her break. Surprised? Her voice was steady, calm. Too calm. Her husband scoffed. We knew you'd figure something out. His words were casual, dismissive, as if this was nothing more than a harmless prank. But she saw it, the flicker of discomfort in his eyes. The realization that she hadn't fallen apart. The realization that his little game hadn't broken her. One of his friends smirked. Hope you had fun on your little adventure. The others chuckled, sipping their drinks. She wanted to scream. To throw the nearest glass against the wall. To make them feel an ounce of the humiliation, the fear, the rage that had burned inside her as she wandered through that town, wondering how she had ever trusted these people. But she did none of those things. Instead, she took a slow step forward, dropping something onto the table with a soft clink. A single, neatly folded receipt. Her husband frowned, picking it up. His eyes scanned the words, and then he stiffened. First confusion. Then realization. Then something else. Something dangerously close to fear. His friends leaned in, their curiosity turning into murmurs of surprise. It wasn't just any receipt. It was proof. Proof that she had found her way back without them. Proof that she had paid for her own room, her own dinner, her own way back, using money she had quietly transferred to herself before they even left for this trip. Because deep down, she had always known. She had known that one day, she might need to stand on her own. That one day, she would have to stop believing in the love she had once imagined and start believing in herself. And tonight, that moment had come. She leveled her husband with a steady gaze. Enjoy the rest of your trip, she said, voice cool. Then, before he could react, before anyone could say a word, she turned and walked away. Not because she was running. Not because she was hurt. But because she had already won. And for the first time in a long time, she was free. At Storytelling and Beyond, we share powerful stories of resilience, strength, and the unexpected turns of life. If this story moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel.